In 2012, one of Hollywood's biggest stars took on the role of one of literature's most iconic action heroes. Tom Cruise, fresh off the success of Mission Impossible: Ghost Protocol, stepped into the shoes of Lee Child's hulking military investigator, Jack Reacher. The film, directed by Christopher McQuarrie, earned $218 million worldwide, and enough praise to warrant a sequel. Yet by 2016, after just 2 movies, the franchise came to an abrupt halt. Now, a decade later, Amazon's Reacher series starring Alan Ritchson has become one of the streaming platform's biggest hits, earning a near-perfect 95% on Rotten Tomatoes. So what went wrong with Cruise's version? When Jack Reacher hit theaters, it had everything going for it: a proven director in Christopher McQuarrie, a built-in audience from Lee Child's best-selling books, and Tom Cruise at the height of his action star powers. But something wasn't clicking with audiences, and by the time Jack Reacher: Never Go Back arrived in 2016, the franchise was running on fumes. Let's break down exactly how Hollywood managed to fumble what should have been a slam dunk series. But before we race on, a quick reminder to hit subscribe. It's a small click for you, but a huge deal for us. Thanks. The elephant in the room. Let's address the most obvious issues first: the physical mismatch between Tom Cruise and Jack Reacher. In Lee Child's novels, Reacher is described as a towering figure, 6 foot 5 inches tall, 250 pounds, with hands the size of dinner plates, and a chest like a beer keg. He's meant to be physically imposing, someone whose mere presence makes others nervous. Tom Cruise, standing at 5 foot 7 inches, simply couldn't deliver that essential aspect of the character. The impact was particularly noticeable in iconic book scenes that had to be modified for the films. Take the famous 5-on-1 fight from One Shot in the book. Reacher's size makes the odds believable. As Childs wrote, his size was enough to give them pause. Each of them had to be thinking about being the first one to step forward. The movie had to completely reimagine such sequences to accommodate Cruise's different physical presence. Even Werner Herzog, who played the villain in the first film, commented on this disconnect, saying in later interviews,
"With Tom Cruise, very easy, because he's such a professional."
The physical disparity between the book and the film version created a different kind of tension than what was originally intended. While Cruise has proven time and again that he can pull off incredible action sequences, Reacher's size isn't just about action, it's fundamental to who the character is. In the books, Reacher's physical presence is a deterrent, often preventing fights before they begin. People take one look at him and think twice about causing trouble. With Cruise, the franchise had to rely more heavily on fight choreography and action sequences to establish Reacher's dominance, fundamentally changing the character's dynamic. The McQuarrie factor. The first Jack Reacher film, while not a massive hit, had something going for it: Christopher McQuarrie's steady directorial hand. McQuarrie understood how to balance the source material's gritty tone with Cruise's star power. The result was a tight, well-crafted thriller that earned praise for its practical action sequences and methodical pacing. But when Quarrie departed to direct Mission Impossible: Rogue Nation, the sequel landed in the hands of Edward Zwick. While Zwick is a talented filmmaker, his approach to Never Go Back stripped away much of what made the first film work. Gone was the methodical tension, replaced by standard action movie fare. Even Zwick himself later admitted the movie's shortcomings, writing in his memoir that they mistakenly thought the audience might enjoy a mashup of Jack Reacher and Paper Moon, when in fact they wanted more red meat. The Cruise conundrum. Here's where we hit another fundamental problem. Tom Cruise had become bigger than the character he was playing. By 2012, Cruise had cultivated such a specific screen presence that audiences weren't seeing Jack Reacher, they were seeing Tom Cruise playing Jack Reacher. This issue became even more apparent in Never Go Back. While Cruise is undeniably one of our greatest action stars, but his polished, high-energy performance style clashed with Reacher's rougher, more laconic character. In the books, Reacher is described as deliberate, almost slow in his movements, until he needs to act. He's more like a python than a tiger, patient, still, then explosively lethal. Cruise's naturally intense kinetic screen presence worked against this crucial aspect of the character. The adaptation trap. The decision to adapt One Shot for the first film was sound. It's one of Child's more cinematic novels. However, skipping ahead to Never Go Back, the 18th book in the series, for the sequel created problems. The sequel introduced elements like a potential daughter for Reacher and a female military partner, fundamentally altering the loner dynamic that makes the character compelling. The movies also struggle to translate Reacher's internal monologues, a crucial element of the books where readers get insight into his analytical mind and decision-making process. Without this insight, the movie Reacher often came across as just another action hero, rather than the unique characters readers had grown to love. The budget burden. Let's talk numbers. The first Jack Reacher cost $60 million to make and earned $218 million worldwide.
Not bad, not bad.
But not spectacular for a Tom Cruise action movie. Never Go Back cost the same but earned only $162 million. For comparison, Mission Impossible Rogue Nation, released around the same time, made $683 million. Hollywood's definition of success for a Tom Cruise vehicle had become impossibly high. This created a catch-22 situation. The movies needed Cruise's star power to justify their budgets, but his presence demanded bigger box office returns than a faithful Reacher adaptation could realistically deliver. The books are essentially modern noir stories, methodical, character-driven mysteries with bursts of violence. Both Cruise attached, audiences expected a Mission Impossible-level spectacle. The problem. The movies could never quite nail down their tone. The first film tried to split the difference between gritty thriller and mainstream action movie, while the sequel leaned harder into conventional Hollywood territory. Neither fully captured the book's unique blend of hard-boiled detective story and American wanderer tale. One of the biggest casualties was Reacher's dry humor. In the books, he's known for deadpan observations and subtle wit. However, the movies, perhaps worried about undermining Cruise's action hero credentials, largely abandoned this aspect. When the humor did appear, it felt more like Cruise's trademark charm than Reacher's sardonic worldview. Here enter Alan Ritchson and Amazon's Reacher series, with a 95% on Rotten Tomatoes and massive viewership. The show proved what book fans had been saying all along. Reacher works better with a physically imposing lead who can disappear into the role, rather than a superstar who brings his own baggage. But it's not just about size. The series succeeded by understanding something the movies missed. Reacher's stories work better in a longer format. The show's 8-episode seasons allow time for the methodical investigation and character development that makes the books compelling. We get to see Reacher think, observe, and deduce, not just fight. What could have been? Perhaps the most frustrating aspect of the movie's failure is that they had real potential. The first film particularly had moments that showed what could have been. Werner Herzog's villain, the well-crafted car chase, and the measured pace of the investigation. These elements proved that a good Reacher adaptation was possible. But ultimately, the franchise fell victim to Hollywood's tendency to prioritize marketable elements over faithful adaptation. Instead of trusting in the source material's proven appeal, they tried to mold Reacher into a more conventional action hero, and lost what made him special in the process. What's particularly ironic about the Cruise-led Reacher films is that they came at a time when television was just beginning to prove itself as the perfect medium for book adaptations. While Hollywood was trying to compress Reacher's complex investigations into 2-hour blockbusters, shows like True Detective were demonstrating how detective stories could breathe and develop over multiple episodes. Movies also arrived just before the streaming revolution, which would later transform how we consume content. Had the franchise launched just a few years later, it might have found its way to streaming first, avoiding the box office pressures that ultimately contributed to its downfall. The lesson for Hollywood. The failure of the Jack Reacher films offers a valuable lesson about adaptation. Sometimes the biggest names and biggest budgets aren't the answer. The success of Amazon's Reacher proves that authenticity to source material often matters more than star power. It's a lesson Hollywood keeps learning the hard way, from The Dark Tower to The Last Airbender. What's fascinating is that Tom Cruise himself would prove this point just a few years later with Top Gun: Maverick, a film that succeeded precisely because it understood and respected what fans loved about the original. The difference? Maverick was built around Cruise's strengths, rather than trying to force him into a pre-existing character that didn't match his abilities. Today, the Cruise Reacher films exist as an interesting footnote in both the actor's career and the character's history. They're not bad movies per se. The first one, in particular, has moments of genuine excellence. but they serve as a perfect case study of how even the most bankable star, talented filmmakers, and beloved source material can miss the mark when the fundamental approach is flawed. Perhaps the most positive outcome is that their relative failure ultimately led to a more faithful adaptation. The Amazon series proves that sometimes you have to get something wrong before you can get it right. It's not just about finding the right actor or the right format. It's about understanding what makes a character and their stories resonate with audiences in the first place. So, what do you think? Was Tom Cruise's Jack Reacher doomed from the start, or could different creative choices have made it work? Let us know in the comments below, and don't forget to subscribe to stay up to date with related videos. This video was made by movie fans for movie fans.